Peace. Welcome to Super Heru Radio. I'm your host, Aseer the Duke of Tears, along with my co-host, Selena the Empress of 10,000 Years, my brother Saga Assad, all of you in the families of the planet Earth, long time no hear from. I hope everybody's been well since the last time we spoke. There's been a lot of wild stuff going on as usual. However, inshallah, the ancestors keep us straight and safe amongst and amidst all of the wild chicanery that's going on and what's left of the so-called United States corporate empire. We want to give thanks and praise to anybody that lost anybody within the last time we spoke. We hope that they reach the Ionosphere and travel further. Since the last time we spoke, I lost my father, so I definitely want to give thanks and praise to him because he's now an ancestor, as well as everyone else. You know what I'm saying? There's been so much, like I said, going on, and we want to strive to address as much of it as possible the time that we have in the sphere of influence. So one of the biggest things that has been going on, I've been taking notice of and aware of, are all of the heightened military escapades that are happening through the so-called police militarization project that we spoke about that will be coming maybe about a year, 2 years ago. We informed you that a lot of the police have been basically being trained by Mossad agents as well as FBI, counterintelligence, counterinsurgency agents. And there has been a kill order put out for original people, specifically black males. It's interesting. Today there was an instance I saw with this dude, this football player, Ray Rice, who committed an act of so-called domestic violence against a woman in an elevator. Now, this is the second instance in which something has happened in an elevator where it's been involved. It's been involved with a black man, a so-called black man and a black female going at it. Well, in this one, he basically laid Shorty out in the elevator, and subsequently he's been dropped, or his contract or whatever is basically going to be forfeited with the team he was playing with. Now, he's playing with a team called the Ravens, and we know that ravens are animals, or I should say birds of prophecy, usually birds that feed on carrion, which means that they're about death and resurrection. Now, it's interesting that they're going ham on him when not even maybe a month and a half ago, we had an instance where a police officer was seen or viewed and videotaped beating a so-called black woman, a grandmother for that instance, repeatedly in the face. And nobody seems to be pressing charges against him or whatever. But again, it seems that when you have on one of those so-called copper badges, that these people feel that they have the right to not only dehumanize you, but put you in a position where you have not only no rights, you have no means of defending yourself, you know what I mean? So in that, you know what I mean, it creates a situation that shows not only the double standard within this so-called country, if you will, but also the fact that these people have no regard for anybody of color at this point. There was another instance where a police officer had to be removed because he put out a text talking about he wished that, you know, they would Ferguson all of these black monkeys that he sees every day. You know what I mean? Of course, he didn't expect the text to get out there, but incidentally it did. You know what I'm saying? So basically, this again is showing the fact that not only has this reached the fever pitch, but now they're about to turn it up. Everybody's asking what the so-called president is going to do, but as you know, he is not going to do nothing. He's not going to create a national referendum against police brutality or national moratorium against police brutality where it automatically results in a default judgment against any police officers in which they would serve some sort of jail time. He's not going to do that because he is in essence, complicit to what these state governments are doing because they're being trained federally to go in on so-called Negroes, blacks, Ethiopians, or anybody else that they have listed as chattel property within this country. This again shows you why and how nationality, birthright, and inheritance is very important for those of us who understand what it really means and what sort of protection it provides us. However, because most of us are still under the assumption or under the of the presumption or the understanding that we are all of these different things and that we are not a connected people because we are all, everybody that with any melanated skin that's walking around in this country allegedly is some sort of boatload slave from Africa. And due to that, we will never resurrect the empire that has always been here for us to re-inherit. Whether or not we admit to that fact, whether or not we want to accept it, it is what it is. And the more our people go against their ancient forefathers and foremothers and all of the struggles and stuff that they died under the erroneous name of Negro, Black, and Colored, we will always be at odds not with each other, but this so-called government, which is really a corporate institution that has not only been bankrupt but has now gone into total receivership, in which now it is to launch. Yes, you could put that in. Yeah. They're about to redistribute that, try to flip a new concept on you that is going to put you under some whole other sort of sacrifice, right of trial by fire. Speaking of trial by fire, if everybody has been noticing the so-called ALS challenges that have been going on, we told people maybe about 2-3 years ago that on this show that the satanic rituals would now fall into a voluntary situation where people would now voluntarily put themselves under the knife, per se, by joining up with viral campaigns going through social media that actually position you and posit you in a not only inferior position, but it puts you in a position where you are now willingly, openly sacrificing yourself. They say that ALS stands for another name for Lou Gehrig's disease. However, if it was really about Lou Gehrig's disease, then why not just call it that? Well, the reason why they don't want to do that is because this ALS thing has absolutely nothing to do with what it is they're telling you it is, as usual, because everything with the so-called corporate government, being that it has been Nazi influenced since the 40s, is really about turning everyone into wanton sacrificial lambs for this beast. And when I say beast, I'm talking about a beast literally. You know what I mean? The beast in question that we're talking about is this thing that is called William Cooper did a book called Behold the Pale Horse, and in it he talked about the actual beast program that is running out of the IBM computer. This IBM computer that has been tabulating and retabulating and trying to categorize and classify everyone on the planet has been upgraded to what is called a Blue Gene P processor computer. Now, this thing is working totally under an AI program, meaning artificial intelligence program, by which it basically is self-sufficient and self-functioning. It is functioning at such a high level of data that it basically is producing outside algorithms based upon whatever engendered process or processors are functioning through that. You know what I'm saying? And unfortunately, people are making themselves open to this form of human sacrifice. How are they doing that? Well, ALS is actually a code for the term a Luciferian sacrifice. And the challenge is the challenge against the Most High or the Creator. Unfortunately, most of our people are not going to understand that when they put the ice over their heads in the form of the bucket, that is an actual form or a literal term that has been used for a long time called kicking the bucket, such as the term the bucket list means the things that are listed or that you want to do before you die. Now, people think that this is far-fetched or whatever. Hey, buddy. No, you got to let me do it, okay? Okay, son. Okay, son. Okay, I hear you, son. It's to the point now where it has gone viral, and now you have people. Initially, when it was set up where people were basically saying, okay, well, you either do the challenge or you donate the money. You know what I mean? When you do the challenge, if you notice, everybody has to nominate somebody else. The person that you nominate is the next person allegedly that's supposed to be sacrificed. The other aspect of this is that when the people do this so-called challenge, as they're calling it, the first thing that they do is upload the visual aspect of what they've done up into the social media network, whether it be on YouTube or whatever. What you got to realize is that this processor, this beast, this multi-layered computer, then what it does is it creates an algorithm, because this computer is based on something that is referred to, or that they refer to as predictive programming. The theory of predictive programming basically proposes that public media, such as film, television, newscasts, or whatever, are deliberately seeded with clues for future social, political, and technological changes. And based on this, when relevant change is later introduced to the world, the public has become used to the idea through the exposure and therefore passively accepts it rather than offering resistance or opposition. Predictive programming is also thought to be a means of propaganda, or what we call mass psychological mind control, or was also called social engineering, that operates on a subliminal and implicit level. The way that we can prove that this is true is based on the book, let's say 1984. When Orwell wrote that book, he basically said that Big Brother is watching and that they're going to create a system by which everybody is monitored and nobody's going to be able to do anything without them or whatever. And here we are. They actually have a process and a world by which they've created that. So because people back in the days read that book, thought he was bugging and thought that whole thing was fake or whatever, you know, as real as it turned out to be, what I noticed is that people, instead of railing against it, they basically adopted it, meaning that everybody is surveilling everybody. I.e., in a situation or a society like that, then what happens is anybody that chooses to be private is automatically looked as a suspect, because the idea is, well, if you weren't doing anything, then what does it matter if anybody's watching you? So in that, the people themselves have accepted the mark of the beast. Everybody think it's a RFID chip. That's the last aspect of it. The true chip, or the true vehicle that they're using this through, is through the cell phones. How many people, when you walk out in the street in a day, are not even looking up? They're actually walking down the street with their heads down looking at this device by which they put their entire life, their whole phone, everything in it. How many people that's listening today have the ability to remember any of the numbers that's in their phone? You don't, because the rotary system by which we grew up on, or at least I grew up on, my generation grew up on, is totally obsolete, by which people stop relying on their own memory. When you stop relying on your memory, then what happens is you fall into a system by which you use outside devices to store and act as your memory. These devices, being that they're all created by these corporations that are basically all plugged into this so-called beast Blue Gene P program multiprocessor that they refer to as the Beast. This is the same system that the Nazis was using to categorize the Jews. All of the so-called Jews that had the markings, the numbers on their arms, those numbers were scanned and put into the pre-aspect of what this thing has become. Therefore, the whole system of monetization of human beings and turning them into human capital has become a natural aspect. Therefore, what this then means is that when you upload this image of you dousing yourself with this ice water, then what happens is that the computer then creates an algorithm based upon whatever file the FBI has on you from its databases, and creates an algorithm by which whatever predictive programming will be sanctioned or function by which you will fall into some sort of sacrifice, meaning that based upon when you uploaded it, how it looked when you uploaded it, the IP address in which you did it, they create an algorithm and a mathematical probability matrix from that by which at some future time you or whoever you nominated or whoever does it will or may be sacrificed. That's just how it works. Now, the interesting thing is that whenever an algorithm like that is created, then what happens is the first individual to usually do it is usually the one that has to be sacrificed to be able to set the pattern for those people who have done it to be sacrificed. So, case in point, from a news agency I found, and it says the Ice Bucket Challenger co-founder Corey Griffin, 27, drowns in an accident. Now think about that. The guy who did the first challenge dies by drowning, which then sets the preposition or precognitive program by which now everybody that does the challenge now falls under that perspective and may not die by drowning, but water will somehow be involved in whatever death or however they choose to get sacrificed. So it goes on to say, now, first of all, his name is Core meaning the center, right? Corey. Core meaning the center. Core meaning the foundation. Griffin, right? Now, we know a griffin is a half eagle, half lion, half gargoyle, right? So we're talking about a demonic entity. And then he was close friends with a guy named Pete or Peter Freitas, right? Pete or Peter is another name for is another way of saying Pindar or penis. So again, we're talking about an initiative energy. Freitas or Fratus or Freighter is the name that is given to the initiates of the Golden Dawn, such as you had Freighter Parsons, Freighter Hubbard, Freighter Crowley, Freighter Akkad, right? So again, this is some sort of Golden Dawn influence sacrifice matrix. He died at 29. 2 and 9 is 11. 11 is a master number busting down to 2. 2 is the number of wisdom. He was diagnosed with ALS in 2012. So that's 2 plus 2 is 4, which is culture. 4 and 1 is 5. 5 and 2 is 7, right? He drowns at the age of 27, right? So that's another 7, right? So that's 7 and 7 is 14, right? 1 and 4 is 5. 5 and 2 is 7. So that's 3 7. So that's 7 7 7, which then busts down to Crowley's so-called Babylon working, okay? Whose loved ones first launched, right? Like shooting something out, right? The Ice Bucket Challenge to raise money for awareness of ALS research, which is Lou Gehrig's disease, which is, neither here nor there. Corey helped pioneer the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge, which has gone viral, and raised millions of dollars for the cause. After leaving a fundraiser for ALS, Corey dove off a building at Strait Wharf at Nantucket at 2 a.m. on August 16th. Okay, so that's 16 plus 2 is 18, which is the number of Saturn, right, which is 9, which is born, coming into existence, and drowned. According to the Boston Globe, he floated to the surface, then he sank. He did not come up again. The report says Corey was pronounced dead at what time? 3 a.m. in the morning. 3 a.m. is the witches' midnight, what they call witches' midnight, or the demon's dawn. Right? So that's the witching hour. Exactly, babe. The demonic witching hour. He helped raise over $100,000 for ALS research on the night of his death. Now, what I believe is that they threw him off the joint as the ritual, and he drowned. So again, the first guy who did the challenge, who doused water over his head, has now died by water. You know what I'm saying? So is that a coincidence? I think it's a coincidence, because nothing that happens in these people's situation is actually dealing with coincidence, dealing with what they call a bastardized version of chaos magic. The first dude started it. The interesting thing on top of that was the second person to die, right, being that we just said and showed and proved that it's a Scottish Rite ritual, because Scottish Rite is an aegis or a part of the Golden Dawn Matrix, which has really nothing to do with Freemasonry. This was all Luciferianism apostatized and put into modern Freemasonry by Albert Pike, Helena Blavatsky, Anna Besant, what's the other chick? Annie Besant, the Theosophic Society, and the Lucifer Trust. So in that, the next one to die was a Scottish teen, right? So it's a Scottish Rite ritual. Then the first thing they write is a Scottish teen dies in an ice bucket challenge related tragedy. This dude's name was Cameron Lancaster. Cameron, right, was the name of the plantation, the Cameron Bays, or the plantation that George Washington, a.k.a. Washington, grew up on. And the Lancasters were the Moors, or the jet black Moor, the Duke of Lancaster, who had a baby with the mulatto Queen Elizabeth and had a son named Sir Francis Bacon, also called the Professor, who spoke at the signing of the Declaration of Independence. He died in a tragedy linked to the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge. The death of an 18 is that number again, 18. 1 and 8 is 9, so that's born, but 18 again is the number of Saturn. An 18-year-old Scottish man died where? In a flooded quarry. Is being linked to the Ice Bucket Challenge. He died Sunday. He died on a Sunday, which is the sacrifice of the sun, right? The sun god. The emergency service and police in Scotland, the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, and the Scottish Ambulance Service were called to Preston Hill Quarry near a place called Inverkeithing. Inver, like invert, Keith, right, meaning chief, and ling, or ing, meaning the inverting of the king, right? After he disappeared, right, when he disappeared about 5 p.m. His body was recovered around 9 p.m. So 9 and 5, 13, 14, right? We know 14 is the number of Osiris, which represents death and resurrection. And he's found around 9 p.m. after 4 hours underwater, right? So that's 9 plus 5 is 14. 14 plus 4 is 18 again. Here we go. So, again, this is not, when these people talking about, Illuminati and all this other type of stuff, but you got to understand, these people are not that smart to be creating these algorithms and these numerical patterns by which they follow. These people are being orchestrated and led by a demon that has been invoked within this bestial machine that is creating these algorithms and these systematic sequences by which people are falling into based upon their own aspects of voluntary wanton sacrifice by not understanding what they're doing. The bucket of ice that is poured over you, remember, ice freezes at 32 degrees. The highest level in the Scottish Rite Masonry is 32 degrees. Here we are again. You see what I'm saying? The second person to now, based upon this algorithm, to now put themselves in a position to die by the instance of water after they poured this water over their head, this ice bucket over their head, which is a form of what they call cleansing or purging, right? Now, ALS, in terms of the ALS, as is actually the literal scientific term, stands for amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. Now, what is amyotrophic lateral sclerosis? It is a disease of the nerve cells in the brain and the spinal cord that control voluntary muscle movement. So now, this is not to say that Lou Gehrig's disease and things like that is not real, but what these people are doing has nothing to do with Lou Gehrig's disease. If it was about Lou Gehrig's disease, then they would call it what? LG, right? LGD, right? But they're not calling it that. They're calling it ALS. So when you read what the actual process is a disease of the nerve cells in the brain and the spinal cord that control voluntary muscle movement. So when you voluntarily, right, have a disease, have been infected with the disease, which is the fake lie about what it's about, and then you voluntarily decide to pick up this bucket full of cold water and then douse it over your head, the first thing that happens is that your nerve cells in your brain and your spinal cord are now being controlled voluntarily. So since they are basically giving you an anathema against yourself. Who invented this disease? Who invented this understanding, or who created what this thing is, or who diagnosed it? The guy that diagnosed it was a guy named Charot, C-H-A-R-C-O-T. Charot is best known today outside the community of neurologists for his work in what? Hypnosis and hysteria, right? He initially believed that hysteria was a neurological disorder for which his patients were predisposed, meaning that people that he was dealing with felt had already been crazy. So what he did to them to find out they were crazy was a form of torture. He studied also at a place called Ingolstadt University, or did one of his studies or whatever. Now, Ingolstadt University in history is very interesting because that's where your boy Frankenstein, Dr. Frankenstein, or the person who's based on Frankenstein, the whole story, whatever, went to study gross anatomy, by which they dealt with the reanimation of dead bodies. Right? Charot first began studying this hysteria after creating a special ward for non-insane females, meaning people who he knew that wasn't crazy, and then diagnosed them with something he created called hysteroepilepsy, in which he discovered two distinct forms of hysteria among these women, minor hysteria and major hysteria. His interest in hysteria and hypnotism developed at a time when the general public was fascinated with what they call animal magnetism, with his mesmerism, which is a form of mind control. You understand? This dude also was a part of an order called the Golden Dawn. You understand? So this mesmerization, which later was revealed to be a method of inducing hypnosis, right, was then taken by the greater scientific community, by which all of the so-called Freemasons can now use this as a means to lock up people who started to come out and speak against them. This is what was in the movie. This is what the movie in the movie From Hell was about, where Jack the Ripper, who they said was the doctor for King Edward, who was allegedly dying of syphilis, was out there killing all the prostitutes and all that ritualistically through Freemasonic ritual. And whenever those so-called Masons or whatever got through something or whatever, the first thing that they would do when they start spouting the truth was be diagnosed with hysteria. And once they were diagnosed with hysteria, they would get locked up, you see what I'm saying, in one of these asylums where they would be permanently lobotomized or whatever they're going to do to them and shut them up. Interesting enough, Blue Cantrell, a singer, came out recently and was talking about how people was trying to kill her or whatever, and the first thing they did was lock her up in an asylum and diagnosed her with hysteria. You see what I'm saying? Once she started speaking out against these whose baby, which is another interesting thing. You know what I mean? Now, I'm not saying that these people have power like that. You know what I mean? But I am saying that a lot of these people are satanically hooked up. This don't mean that they at the top of the chain. Of course not. They're not going to let no so-called melanated person, no matter how many black people they sacrifice, be up in there with their real rituals and stuff they doing. However, these people are granted little privileges and stuff like that to keep it going because they are satanically influenced. And they have accepted that satanic influence or else, above their soul, above their children, or whatever. So when we hear people use the term Illuminati or Illuminatus, what you got to understand is that they're flipping the language on you. The Illuminati comes from the Alumbrados, which were, again, a group of Moors who were to pass on Moorish science after the fall of Granada in 1492. Therefore, the Illuminati is anyone that is bringing the light. The people that these people are talking about, you know, the Rothschilds, the Bilderbergs, and these people are not bringing light. These people are bringing darkness or death. So how could they be the Illuminati? How could they be the Illuminati when they are not the ones who are bringing light? They're bringing the darkness. What then that means is that the people who are actually the light, or the so-called Illuminatis, or the ones who are bringing the true work of the Alumbrados, are the people who are doing the opposite of that. So that's any and everybody with knowledge of themselves. So again, what this means is that they have turned you again against yourself by believing that when you see this pyramid being thrown up or whatever, and because a white boy is wearing it, like Crowley or one of these people wearing it, you believe that it's evil. How can something that your ancestors created for you to understand and remember who you are be evil? It cannot be. This is what is called the double mind. This is represented by the double head on the 32 degrees of the double-headed, ball-headed eagle on the 32 degrees of the Scottish Rite. It is making the light appear dark and the dark appear light. This is exacerbated and beat down into the consciousness of the populace by creating a schism between so-called lighter-skinned or darker-skinned people through colorable law. So those people who undertook this challenge, right, have basically made themselves open to this thing and have to do, in my opinion, need to do a video renouncing all of that, what they've done, now that they understand that ALS is really a acronym for a Luciferian sacrifice. This don't mean that you evil or bad because you did not know. But under colorable law, ignorance of the law is no excuse. You see how they flip it? You see how they box you in? Have you ever noticed that when you look at a bird's eye view of a city and then you look at a motherboard or a computer motherboard, they're basically laid out the same way. When you look at the grid pattern of a city, and you look at the motherboard that is inside a computer, they're laid out identical. We saw this in the Matrix. You know what I'm saying? That is to say that the way that the world appears around us today is not real. It is a composite of a computer program that is being orchestrated and is being premeditated through predictive or precognitive programming through this artificial entity that they've imbued all these Luciferian sacrifices to enact. Of the celebrities that went down with this was Robin Williams, who said died by hanging from his belt, meaning his midsection, right? Meaning the thing that you use to circumscribe your waist. Now, the interesting thing is he did a movie called The World's Greatest Dad, and in that movie, he was a horrible father. And there's a scene where he comes in and he basically was mentally abusing, killed himself, and wrote this message in the computer about why he did it and how whack up a father this dude was. So what he then did was went into the computer, changed the note, look at him as the reason why, his son did this, and then chose to hang the boy from the door, which is very interesting because they said that he was found hung by the door. Now, when we talk about predictive programming, all we need to do is look at the Family Guy episodes, and you would see that in the episode where Peter, again, the Griffin, right, like Corey Griffin, Peter or Pindar or Penis Griffin, right, was trying to kill himself through the whole thing. And every time he tried to kill himself, whatever he tried to kill himself with turned into Robin Williams. So there's a scene in it where he goes to shoot himself in the head, and the gun that he holds to his temple turns into Robin Williams. Right after that, he screams, drops the gun, and runs to the door, and the door itself turns into Robin Williams. Turns into Robin Williams. Again, the door. That is predictive programming. The same way they did the Boston bombing, the Boston bombing, where Peter Griffin again is in the bar and he presses his cell phone and the bombs go off at the Boston Marathon or whatever. There was also a movie called, being that they use the term marathon, there's also a movie called The Marathon Man, Dustin Hoffman, and in that movie he was being chased by ex-Nazis who were in the government, who were trying to create an assassination attempt to take over the government, and they thought that he knew, and they basically tortured him by putting him in a bathtub full of ice. You see, again, predictive programming. There's so many instances by which this has been happening where, like when Biggie said, blah, 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 blow up like the World Trade, and then the Cool had a album cover where, the World Trade Center was blowing up, and then a couple of other instances in which you had the movie Airplane, where they showed the planes flying into the buildings and all that, and then one day what happens? These planes allegedly fly into the building, which I don't even believe that happened like that. And I was in New York at the time that all that happened. So all of that, again, gets through and is put through the medium of the television, which, again, is an operative tool of this super mega computer that is listed as the blue gene P. Now, the blue gene represents the blue within you, which is the RNA, the ribonucleic acid, which essentially is what tells the DNA what to make. And it's blue. So RNA technically is blue. The DNA is technically red. Just like you have blue states and you have red states. Just like you have the Crips and you have the Bloods. Just like you have the North and the South. See what I'm saying? All of these things consist of this precognitive or predictive programming that is running rampant within and without this so-called world, being that everything that, you know what I'm saying? So all of this, you see what I'm saying? We're all basically being run as neurons within this giant so-called supercomputer that everybody is acting like is real life or is supposed to look like this. Everything that we know in this modern age comes down to us from a time that was